welcome to today's episode of the Career Hacking Podcast. Our guest today is Andrew from Speak Up for Blue, which is actually a podcast collective, and we'll talk a bit about that. But the main topic of this episode is to do a deep dive, pardon the pun, into marine biology and how you can get into that career and the kind of things about that. So do you want to maybe just introduce yourself a bit first, Andrew? Tell us a bit about yourself, like where you're from, what it is you're currently doing.
Yeah, for sure. My name's Andrew. I am a marine biologist and a science communicator, which is sort of what I've been doing for the last 15 years of my life for the most part. Or 15, I guess it's 10 years of my life, sorry. I live in Canada. I live just outside of Toronto in a place called Burlington, Ontario. And it's kind of in the middle of Canada, which is kind of weird for a marine biologist to live in the middle of Canada. But that's part of my story that I'm sure we'll get into today. But I host a podcast and co-host another podcast. One is How to Protect the Ocean, and the one I co-host is Beyond Jaws. The idea behind that is to get in front of people or into the ears of people because it's an audio podcast, but to talk to them about what's happening with the ocean, how they can speak up for the ocean, and what they can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And then that's sort of my tagline that I say every episode. And it's a way to just get people involved and interested beyond sort of the mainstream headlines that you see that are a lot of doom and gloom around the ocean, or like shark attacks or, whales dying or things like that. There are a lot of great things that are happening in the ocean, a lot of great projects that can provide a lot of optimism for saving the ocean. And it's just getting the information out there. So that's sort of been my career. But in the past, I've worked for government, for the federal government. I've worked as a private consultant, an environmental consultant. I've worked for nonprofit organizations. So I've done a little bit of everything. And during that time, I've actually taught people how to get a job in marine biology. Because it's a very difficult thing to do because we're not taught how to do that. I'm sure with a lot of I believe your previous guests had the same kind of thing where a lot of people just don't know what to do when they come out of school, or whether it's high school or whether it's college or whether it's a trade program. It's not really given, that you're going to get a job. You have to work pretty hard for it. And so I help people with that.
Oh, that's amazing to hear. And I think that makes you such a great fit to come on this podcast, because the aim of the game here is I want to provide that information for when people kind of, they finish university or college or school or anything, and, they're not sure what to do next. And it can be really difficult. There's a lot of choice, but also a lot of it does require, you've got to dedicate yourself to it. So we kind of need more information on that. So I'm really glad to have you here today. I think in the UK as well, like a lot of people, even though we're surrounded by water, like I'm in Manchester, which is kind of landlocked. We have like canals, things like that, but we're not by the sea. And I think that's the case for a lot of people, but it is still so important. And like we have universities in the UK, like the one off the top of my head is Bangor University in Wales. I think they have like a very good marine biology kind of department. Yeah.
And University of Exeter as well. University of Exeter. Yeah, okay, they're pretty good too.
Really cool. Yeah. So, do you want to just maybe kind of explain a bit about how you got into marine biology? Like, how do you find that passion? Has it always been something you've been interested in, or did you stumble across it? Like, how did you start off with that career?
I would say I'm one of the people where I knew what I wanted to do as soon as I hit the age of 14. I was infatuated with documentaries, and I grew up in the 80s and 90s. And so my documentaries were, Jacques Cousteau and Sir David Attenborough, watching, Blue Planet, and even what was going on before that. I was there with the inception of Shark Week. And so those documentaries really helped me sort of realize what I wanted to do. I was always watching those, and I was always getting lost in just sort of the blue aspect of the ocean, and it made me feel good. And I didn't travel that much when I was a kid, but I always was just in that infatuation and learning about marine biology, going to the library, finding information, looking at encyclopedias back then. That was like the Wikipedia of now. But looking at, and looking at as many books as possible. All of my high school projects if I could, I would do it on marine biology, whether it be dolphins or sharks or even aquatic biology. I have the Great Lakes surrounding here, so I would do it on that as well. And that, so I was always just, I was just so passionate about being a marine biologist that I always wanted to do it throughout high school. Then I went to university. I went to the University of Guelph here in Ontario, which had a really good marine biology program, believe it or not. And just like, University of Bangor or the University of Exeter, sometimes you don't realize, what type of programs are there, but you get professors, a series of professors who all go to one university that are experts in their own field, and they're very good, and they might do marine biology, or more work in the marine realm. And so being able to find that and having that close to home was really an asset for me. So I went to the University of Guelph, again, just kind of immersed myself in the textbooks and so forth, and the content that was being taught during the lectures and the courses, and then just kind of networking with the professors at the university and just getting to know them, volunteering in their labs. And we had a sort of like a water lab, and I volunteered there for my last year. I wish I had volunteered a little earlier. I always tell people, once you get into university, volunteer in a lab as soon as you hit, your first year. But that's what I did. And when I graduated, I was just like, okay, where do I go from here? Like, what do I do? I didn't want to go to grad school right away. I want to work. I want to work in the field, like actually on the ocean. And that's sort of just kind of how it peaked, is that was really the start of it all. But also that's where I met the big challenge, was how do I get a job in this business? Like, I don't really know as many people as I thought I did. I knew the people in my university, but they were all like, go to graduate school, go get your master's, go get your PhD, become a professor. Because that's what professors will tell you, is go do, become a professor. Not everybody can be a professor. Not everybody wants to be a professor. And it's not always made out for everybody, including myself. And so I wanted to kind of dive into a different area and be a technician of some sort, or just be in the field and enjoy the ocean.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting, though. I really like what you said about how, even though you've known what you've wanted to do from such a young age and things, is that you still experience the same kind of almost crisis of faith, I suppose, that a lot of people do, where it's like, I don't know what to do. Like, even if you've dedicated yourself to a career path, or if you've gone to university and put all that effort in, like with the volunteering and the networking, and you can still be like, I'm not sure where to go from here. And I think with academia, it is an issue that almost it's always going to be the push to do more academia and do more study, do more of the theoretical side, even though it might not suit your career, just because it is what everyone else does. It's like the natural progression. I definitely had that at university for myself. It was go and be a teacher, or you're going to be a lecturer. There's no in between. And I've done the complete opposite. But what drove you to wanting to be a technician then and work in the field specifically?
I think it was just more of, growing up in Ontario, I wasn't around the ocean that much. And in my last year of university, I did a field course just before the year started. So it was just like in the summer before my year started. And we went out to New Brunswick, and we were out in a bay called Passamaquoddy Bay. And I got to sort of get a little experience on the water on a boat, and, using some instrumentation to take some measurements and so forth. So I was just like, okay, I want to be on the water. I haven't been on the water. At that point, I hadn't even slept on a boat overnight. Where, a lot of marine biology jobs, you're on a boat for weeks at a time. I'd never spent a night on a boat. So I never really got to do it at that point, but I got to get that experience, that taste, and be like, I actually really like this. I would love to be on a boat more often. And so I started to look for jobs that way, but it wasn't as easy as I expected. I thought I would graduate and I would be recruited. I had this like idea in my head. I'm like, I'm so great, I'd be recruited. I had no idea the amount of graduates, not only just in my class, like my year, but just North America wide, not even including worldwide. How many marine biologists are graduating? This is back in 2001. I can just imagine what it is now. As marine biology is more popular, it's more accessible now. Universities are more accessible. And so I was just like, well, I'll just get a job. Like, it'll be easy to find a job. It wasn't that easy. And I ended up finding my first job ended up being a local job here in Ontario, where I just basically picked the first job that I saw. or that I got an interview for. I was able to be successful in that interview, and I was able to get it. And it was a freshwater technician job. So I was going around the rivers in Toronto. We're doing measurements. It was like one of the conservation authorities here. They do that every year. It's like an assessment. And it was a great gig. I spent all summer out on the water, and wasn't on a boat, but we were in the water literally, and looking at little insects and aquatic insects and fish, and doing identification. I learned a lot about electrofishing and using different instruments to take measurements. And that was fun, but it wasn't the ocean. It wasn't what I really wanted. So that was about 6 months. And then I spent the next 6 months looking for a job. And, I would have benefited from having a program in my university where it tells you how, like, within my program, to say this is how you apply for a marine biology job, or this is what you should do if you want to go into marine conservation or marine biology. We didn't have that. We had a career center, which was primarily dedicated to just general resume writing and general like application processes, which is very different if you're trying to apply for a science position. The cover letter in a business application would be very basic. It'd be one page, and it would be, thank you for allowing me to apply for this. I'm really excited. Here's why I think I qualify, one paragraph. And then thank you very much. I'm a hard worker, and so forth. And then you sign your name, and then hopefully your resume speaks for itself. That's what they kind of gave me when I first went there. Little did I know that the cover letter for a lot of the jobs that I applied for later would require, 6-7 pages. It was like an essay, of yourself and your experiences and things. And so I didn't have a clue, and I didn't know what job I should apply for. So I applied for literally everything, Hannah. I applied for, I think I tried to, I'm very analytical. So I put a spreadsheet up on my computer. Now you got to remember, this is 2001. Okay. This is not like 9/11 just happened. Internet crash happened. The internet is really starting to kick off, but there weren't blogs, there weren't social media sites, there's no LinkedIn or anything like that. This was, you go on a organizations or institutes or universities website, and you look at the jobs that they have, and then you apply to it. And then you have to apply. You could start to apply through email. Some of them were still mail. And you weren't allowed to call. You were allowed to call sometimes. You weren't allowed to call all the time. But what I would do is I would have a spreadsheet. I would write the job, where it was, when I applied, and once I sent it out, I would write down that date. I even sometimes wrote down the time, and then 2 weeks later, I would call them. I would literally just call them and be like, "Hey, I applied for this job, 2 weeks ago." And if I got a voicemail, I would just leave a voicemail. If I got somebody, they would probably brush me off. But I ended up applying for 400 different jobs in 6 months. But I applied for, yeah, I applied for everything. Like there were jobs that I had no business applying for. I was just like, no, if they like me, they like me. I'll just try it. Like, what's the harm? The harm was I templated a lot of it, and I made a lot of mistakes. There was a point where I don't even think I changed names of the person I was applying to, or like I would make so many mistakes because you're trying to apply to literally everything. I didn't have a PhD. I applied to stuff that required PhDs. I didn't have like any of the experience, like 10 years experience. I barely had any experience, maybe 6 months experience at that. And I applied for jobs that required 10 years experience. So there were jobs I had no business applying for, but I was just desperate. I was like, I'll apply for everything, and hopefully I'll get that lucky draw. And after 6 months, I got that lucky draw. So I applied for a job in Louisiana. It was with Louisiana University's Marine Consortium called LUMCON. And so it was in southern US, which I had no idea. I've never lived there. I've only heard about Louisiana. It's in the Gulf of Mexico, which was great. I was like, oh, I'll be on an ocean. It was for a marine technician job. So this is, you live on a boat and you are their technician for that job. And what would happen is people would come out on the boat, chief scientists and their teams would come out, and you would help them gather information that they needed if they needed the instrumentations that you use. And otherwise, you were just like the liaison between the captain and the crew and the science team. So it was a lot of fun. It was great, but I had no idea what it was about. And so I applied to it, and then I didn't hear back. So I actually forgot about it because I was like, I don't necessarily want to live in Louisiana, but I'll call up. It was 3 weeks later. I forgot to call them my 2 weeks. 3 weeks later, I call up and I get the director. of the shipyard and our ship operations. And I'm just like, oh, hi. Like I applied for this job 3 weeks ago, just checking in to see. And he's like, hold on, what's your name? I'm like, Andrew Lewin. He's like, let me pull up your resume. I can hear him rifling through things. I'm like, oh, this is great. Like, this is awesome. Like, what? I had nothing. I didn't know what to expect. This is like 8 o'clock in the morning. I have a part-time job that I'm just about to go to. And he's like, okay, let's look through your resume. He's like, oh, you don't have it. He goes, have you ever been on a boat? I'm like, yeah, I was on a boat, like in my field course. And have you ever been overnight on a boat? I'm like, no. He goes, do you get seasick? I'm like, I don't think so. I had no idea. And he's like, oh, okay. He's like, let me ask you this. Can I call you back in like an hour and I'll get like the port captain on and we'll do a full interview? I'm like, okay. So I did it at my part-time job. I was working at an aquarium store, trying to stay in the ocean kind of thing. I was a salesperson for aquariums, and they knew that I was looking for a job. So I did my interview like at the store. And it was just crazy. And what had happened was literally the luck of the draw. They had 2 technicians that quit the week before, and they didn't have a technician. They were just about to start their season. So they hired me on the spot after that interview. They're like, okay, well, they called me back an hour after that, hired me. And then I was in Louisiana the next week.
Oh, wow.
Like that's how fast it happened. I had a little bit of problem at the border. Like I said, 9/11 had just happened. This was in February of 2002. Try to get across the border. They needed my transcripts. We have a NAFTA agreement. It was easy for me to do if I was an oceanographer. They hired me on as an oceanographer. I had a bit of problem, so they made me wait I was at the customs, like at the airport. They had me sitting in a little white room for like 4 hours, waiting to see if I would say anything that was anywhere like, probably as somebody who's not going there for good reasons. I ended up falling asleep because it was early in the morning. And then they said, no, you got to come back. You got to get your transcripts. I went back 2 days later, got a flight, and I was in Louisiana for the next 8 months and on a boat and doing all this fun stuff. But that was how I got it, by sheer luck of the draw. And I was like, and then I just thought, okay, my career is going to start. This is it. Like I'm going to do a wonderful thing. And I realized, being away, I had a girlfriend at the time who's now my wife, and being away from the family, living at sea all the time, only being around the crew for 24 hours a day. We'd go out and do trips, like day trips, but a lot of times they were like a week or 2 weeks and stuff. I realized it's from looking in the future standpoint that this, like I could have had this job full time. I realized that it wasn't the job I wanted for the rest of my life. I didn't want to live in southern Louisiana. I want to live somewhere else. I didn't know where, but I wanted to live somewhere else. I knew I didn't want to live there. And then I was like, you know what? I had this epiphany one day. I was looking at all the stuff going, like we were doing a dive. We were doing basically like collecting water quality information, and it was like 1,000-meter dive, and I had instrumentation in the water, and I was watching this thing, and I was like, my professor said something to me when I was in university, and he was right. I'm going to contact him. I contacted him, and I said, hey, like, you gave me guff for in a presentation, and when you first told me, I hated you for it because you embarrassed me in front of my colleagues and my classmates, and now I'm looking at this and I'm like, man, you were right. I didn't know anything about, the experience that I was about to get, and it could have helped in the projects that I have. And now I know you're right. And he responded, I just wanted to let you know that. And I wanted to thank you for that. And he responded, he's like, do you want to be my master's student? And I'm like,
Wow.
I never thought about that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, yeah, sure. Why not? So I went to do a master's with him. Went to the University of Guelph. He was at University of Guelph, but he ended up moving to Acadia University out east. I followed him out there. My girlfriend, who's now my wife, followed me out there as well. And then she didn't really want to follow me out there because she wanted to stay in Ontario. And I said, well, let's go there for 2 years. Let me do my master's, and we'll come back home. And that's what we did. And I haven't really left since then. Did my master's, had a chance to do a PhD and stay out there. But I said, no, we'll come back out. We'll come back here. And I'm kind of glad I didn't do the PhD. But and came back. We want to start a family and sort of get on with our lives. It's a difficult life living as a graduate student, especially in the sciences. You don't get paid a lot. You get paid barely anything to live off of, and so it's nice to kind of get a job and start here. So I came back, got a job as a private environmental consultant, and and sort of that was like going to be my life, and I just kind of went on with that. But that's sort of like where it all kicked off, but like the trouble with having that job and trying to find jobs, that kind of followed me, for probably the next like 6 or 7 years, trying to find, that position that I really wanted, that comfortable position where I got to do different things. I wanted the same thing I could get with LumCon, where I got to do different projects and learn from different people, and really talk to different people and hear their stories of them being in the field or them doing studies. But I wanted it here in Ontario. So I knew I had to travel a lot, and I did that through the private consulting. But then I realized, like, private consulting, environmental consulting, is very different than conservation. You're hired by industrial clients, so oil and gas, mining companies, and dredging companies, and so forth, which are technically harming the environment, but they have to follow certain regulations as they go through their process. And so environmental consultants help them to make sure that they're following the right regulations. So they hire us as like a third party. We act as that third party. We make sure they go through the science and pass all their regulations. But after a while, I got to do some pretty cool things. I got to be a marine mammal observer in the field up in the Arctic. So I got to be in the Arctic for 6-7 weeks each summer, which was great. But knowing that it's an oil and gas, it's a seismic survey, oil and gas will eventually, dig, and they'll eventually explore, and they'll eventually ruin that environment. So I didn't want to be a part of that anymore. And so I switched, and I went on my own and did consulting on my own for 2 years. And then I went and I went and worked for the government eventually, federal government. So I was on the other side of it doing more conservation work.
Oh, that is so amazing to hear, though, and really interesting. And I think, like, hearing your journey from, okay, you were in academia, then branched out a bit, and then you went back into academia, which is great because I think with masters they can be tricky to kind of do because you
Yeah.
need to have that niche that they want. Again, with like PhD, anything like that. So it's a big achievement that they were like, okay, you want to come and do a masters, because they knew that you had the skills to do it and that you had the right knowledge or were willing to look into like specific areas. And what
Mm-hmm.
was your master's on? I'm just really curious about that.
Well, I was just thinking about that. I never said what it was. It was on design and determining size of marine protected areas. So this was at that time, the Canadian government just came out with a regulation in 1997 that actually instituted that they were going to put in marine protected areas. So this was 2003, 2004. So it was still fairly new in Canadian waters and Canadian policy. So we were just sort of kind of figuring things out. And I had my supervisor ended up working with World Wildlife Fund here in Canada on putting together sort of like a Scotian Shelf, Bay of Fundy, so the east coast of Canada, even up to Newfoundland, looking at what a series of marine protected areas, like a network of marine protected areas, would look like. And so I was a piece of that. My master's was a piece of that, looking at invertebrates, so crabs, lobsters, shrimp, and looking at what we expect to be there and how many different assemblages are around the Scotian Shelf and Bay of Fundy, and then how can we categorize them and protect those, and where should those boundaries be, if there are boundaries.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting because with that, then, did that help you, like with that specific research or even just doing the masters? Do you think that helped you later on? Because I know you said you found it difficult to kind of figure out, okay, I know I want to do this, but it's got to be the right area, a bit of back
Mm-hmm.
and forth. But do you think the masters help? So if someone was going to do like a marine biology undergraduate, do you think you'd recommend doing any further academic study, like a master's or even the PhD?
So yeah, so the first part of your question, yes, it did help me. Did I know at the time it would help me? No, it did help me because I ended up doing a separate advanced diploma with a local community college as part of my university project, as a part of my thesis on geographic information systems, so GIS, which is now a popular tool to use in a lot of mapping or marine protected area design and so forth. So that learning that was like a savior in my employment experience here in Ontario. The marine protected area stuff was very interesting to me. I'm still interested in it, but I didn't get any jobs out of it afterwards. I don't know if I just didn't have enough connections or I didn't network myself properly. I wish I had gone to more conferences during my master's. The way I did is I did an 8-month college diploma, And then I went to do my master's, but I'd been working on my master's for that year as well, incorporating all my GIS projects and things like that in it. So I got a lot done then. So my master's as a graduate student, I only really spent maybe a year instead of like the 2 to 3 years that you would normally. And so it was a little bit different than what a typical master's would be, where you'd be involved, like you'd be in a lab with all your lab mates and you have your supervisor with you all the time. I spent, time off campus, then spent time at campus. And so I didn't really have a lot of time discussing the project with them. And I lived outside. So I do things in different ways. I like to do it on my own time, my own way. I'm a bit of it's the millennial side of me. I'm not a millennial, but it was the millennial side of me. I'm close to it. And I feel like I just try and do things my own way. But I think from a culture standpoint in the graduate, I missed out on some things in terms of learning sort of the way of the graduate student. I just kind of did it on my own and just did it that way. So from a job afterward perspective, it didn't really help me because I came back to Ontario because my family values took over. And I was just like, we want to stay in Ontario. We want to build a family. We have grandparents here. We have family here. We want to keep everything together. If I had been a little bit more flexible in where I would live, then I probably would have lived in different places and probably followed that subject matter more. In Canada, to work for the government and work in marine protected areas, say in the Arctic, you would live in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I did not want to live in Winnipeg, Manitoba. It gets minus 26 degrees in October. It's not something that I want. It's in the prairies. You're not by an ocean. You would travel to the Arctic and things like that, which would have been cool. But my family didn't want to grow up there. I didn't want to grow up there or have my family grow up there. And so it was just one of those things where it was just it's not in the cards for me at that moment. But it doesn't mean that I didn't follow it. I was on a board of directors for the past 15 years, covering marine protected areas and trying to work in different areas. And so I was able to do it that way. But doing a graduate work, master's or PhD, I always say it depends, for a recommendation for, say, a student, say someone who wants to be a marine biologist, because a lot of people I meet at some point in their high school career wanted to be a marine biologist, but they just didn't follow through with it. Sometimes they didn't have the guidance. Sometimes, they realize it's not a big pay, job. It's not where you get a lot out of being a marine biologist. Pay is not one of them, and that's something to understand depending on what you go into. But graduate work really depends on what you want to do. For these days, it's very competitive. So having a master's degree will help you get a job compared to people who are graduating with just an undergraduate degree. If you have a PhD, a lot of places are taking PhDs because there's so many PhDs now that, they'll take PhDs for the same price that they would get a master's student at. So it's a very difficult time for people to come out and get jobs because the way I did it, I probably wouldn't have gotten it. It would have been a master's student or a PhD student that would have had the one up on me when I first got my job at LumCon. And so, and I built everything else based on the experience that I had. I had a lot of different experience, so I was able to benefit from that. But now it's a lot more difficult. So I would say minimum a master's to succeed in conservation. But then also, if you can afford it, internships. Whether it's away or just, remote internships or working for organizations, I would say that would be the big thing. If you don't want to go to graduate school, is you have to get experience somewhere and somehow. If you can get a job out of it, get paid for it, that's great. If you can't, you gotta volunteer, which is very, it puts people in a bad position who can't afford to do the volunteership. Because what happens is a volunteership, I'm not sure if you've seen this in your sector, in the fintech sector, but for marine biology, it's, you can travel to Mozambique and you can live there for 4 months, but you have to pay to get there and we'll just pay for food and lodging. But you're not going to get paid otherwise. So if you want to go around and do something, you got to pay for your own. And so it's a very difficult thing these days it's very exclusive, to people who can afford to travel to Mozambique or travel to the Maldives or travel down in the Caribbean. It's not an easy thing to do. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the experience that you want for the position that you want. But a lot of people will do it because it gets them a little bit ahead compared to people who don't have that experience.
Yeah, and I think as well, I like that word exclusive because I think PhDs in general and further academia can be a bit exclusive to people who either have like their family wealth behind them, or they might have started later, so they've got their own personal wealth to kind of either fund the degree,
Yeah.
sorry, the PhD. It's either funding the lifestyle, the actual tuition fees, because you don't want to get into more debt, or paying them up front is astronomical. And then I
Yeah.
think as well, like you said, with marine biology on top, you've got, okay, you want to do this study or you want to do this internship. Okay, that's fine. They might pay for it, but then you've got to then travel to Mozambique or
Mm-hmm.
wherever. And then the issue is you've got to then live when you're there, and they might not give you a lot of things. Like they might say, okay, we'll cover you rent, we'll cover the
Yeah.
cost of living, but then you've
Yeah.
got to buy food and you want to explore, you want to meet people, and
Yeah.
you need money for that. And that's my issue with internships, is I think they're a great option, but it's kind of, there's a lot of catches with it, and you've got to kind of be aware of that, and then maybe save up beforehand. And I think they
Yeah.
can be a big obstacle. But like you said, it is getting the experience from somewhere, and if you can get a job, it's great. But that's going
Yeah.
to be the case for so many jobs, well, sectors, where it's like,
Yeah.
if you can get a job, you're going to get paid, you're going to get the experience. But it's
Now
so
this,
difficult.
yeah, for sure. And the solution to that though is to get the experience while you're in university. And what I mean by that is to go to different professors' labs that are in your program and to meet them and to say, I would love to volunteer in your lab. So you're already at the school, you're already doing the work. Do that extra work. It is a lot of work to do it, but you're going to get the experience that professor needs. Not only that, but they're going to they might send you to conferences, or they might introduce you to their colleagues that they're collaborating with on a particular project or a particular study. You start to grow that network. You start to see what the work is like, and then you can go from professor to professor year by year and say, well, I like this type of subject, but I want to try this because this is something I might want to go to. So I might do like, water pollution stuff with fish, or I like toxicology, or I might want to go into more of an ecology and tagging of sharks, something like that. But I may not like that, so I may go somewhere else. And by that, the end of the 4-year degree, or 3 or 4-year degree, you have maybe 2-3 years of experience in different labs. And now you have not only, because the thing is, like, your degree is sort of the minimum, like your undergraduate degree, that paper, that diploma is like the minimum, that you need to get in. It's like the buy-in to get into the position. The experience is always great if you have field experience, if you have this, but then there's other things. Working in a team, can you work well within a team? Do you have, like, if you're working in the field, do you have all your certifications, from safety certifications to, small boat handling to like, instrumentation usage, like that kind of thing. So, like, are you ready to go? When you get hired, how much training do you need other than going through sort of the paperwork and stuff, like for benefits and things like that they provide you for a paying job? What can you just start? Can I just throw you in the field and just be like, okay, this is what we're going to be doing here, the methods, go at it? How good at you are, how good can you be doing that? And that's based on the experiences you've had before. So if you know the different methodologies of putting in an instrument, and they're using that instrument, then they're going to hire you. They're going to be like, wow, this is perfect. And one of the stipulations to do my master's was to be a marine technician for my professor, because I didn't have great marks coming out of undergrad. So I was like, okay, like I'll do that as a job. He paid me for it, and it helped for my tuition, or just cost of living. But, I was able to do that because I had that extra skill set, because I got that experience. And so when you can provide that experience, if you can bring something unique to the table, then that's great. There were a couple of times, like living in Ontario, where there wasn't marine work around, and I had to find some way to work. So I used the GIS skills and the GIS diploma that I got, and I used that, as my in to different companies, or like private work or something like that I did on my own. So having those unique skill sets that you can bring to the table really help. Plus the training and everything, it helps a lot, because that takes a long time. Sometimes it'll take like 2 weeks. If you work for the federal government, you have to do all this different types of training: CPR training, occupational health and safety training. You have to do boat training and get your certifications. That can take like 2 weeks before you even start your position. So if you come in and you already have that from a different job, you're like, yeah, I just need my renewal, like my CPR renewal every year. And they're like, that's an afternoon, or that's a morning. That they can handle that. But everything else is just, yeah, you're right, this is perfect. That gives you that extra edge over another candidate who doesn't have that. And they're like, oh, we want to get started faster. Let's hire this person because they have it.
It kind of streamlines that process then, so it's easier for
Yeah.
them to be like, okay, well, we don't need to do all this
Exactly.
money and pay for trainers to do these specific educational things because you've already got them, which I suppose is a benefit to them. And they'll probably choose you then over someone else in that employment like shortlisting because you've
Yep.
got that relevant experience, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
So would you, this is a bit of a weird question because I know you do marine biology as a career, but would you recommend it to someone? Because by the sounds of it, it is something you have to be really passionate about and have to be really willing to kind of put the effort in for not just your undergraduate, but, you know, a master's, maybe a PhD. You've got to be networking the entire time, doing the extra study, as in doing the extra volunteer work. So is it something you'd recommend to someone? Is there anything that you'd change, maybe going back or do differently?
Would I recommend it? I would recommend it depending on the individual, right? And I would ask them a few questions. What do you want your lifestyle to be? You know, where do you want to picture that? What happens with marine biologists is marine biology takes over. You know, it becomes your identity. You're a marine biologist, so you're always thinking about the ocean. Now, this could happen with other, you know, within the fintech industry and so forth, but with marine biology, you're always trying to think of that next project. You're always trying to think about how you can do something better. So it's like it becomes part of your identity. So you will work at night, you will work on weekends, you will work wherever you can just to complete that. And to really succeed, you almost have to do that in a way. I don't love it, that part of it, because it doesn't give you time for family. It doesn't give you time to relax and enjoy life. But for a lot of people that I've seen, it becomes like their life, it's their identity. They're not like a, you know, I'm a marine biologist, I'm a dad, I'm a coach, I'm this and that. But like marine biology, when I introduce myself, I'm a marine biologist. You know, even though my full-time job is not marine biology. You know, my full-time job, I work for a software company because that's how I pay my mortgage and I can help support my family with my wife. I do the podcast as my passion, but I spend just as much time as it, like I can spend 8 hours easy at night on that as I can doing 8 hours during my day job. Right. And so I always say that my podcasting is my full-time job and I have a side hustle that pays my mortgage, but it's my full-time job technically because I work at it like the 9 to 5. And that's where I'm at right now because that's where I'm happiest, you know, and that's where I can, you know, I'm not away all the time. I'm, you know, with my family. Like I said, I'm a hockey coach, I'm a football coach, and I can do all the extracurriculars that I want. But I don't go out on the boats. I'm not involved. Like my day job is not marine biology. I'm a podcaster. I'm a science communicator. And that's where I felt like as my career has kind of gone forward, I felt that this was the best way that I could have a meaningful impact on conservation, because I realized as I was working for, you know, the government, the state institution in Louisiana, when I came back and I worked for academia as a graduate student, then I came back and I worked as a private environmental consultant. Then I worked for the federal government. I realized that individually I didn't have a lot of an impact. And at the end of my goal has always been, at the end of my career, I can look back and be like, this is what I was able to accomplish. But I never really found it in each of those jobs. I never found like that passion, that love. I was like, this is not for me. This is not what I want. And the only time I've really found it was podcasting, because I'm able to talk to people about the ocean and what's happening with the ocean. And I'm able to get, and you'll probably notice this as your podcast goes along, and you may have already seen that already, but people are starting to realize that I need this information. Like this information makes me feel good. And the impact that I've been able to have doing this podcast has been, you know, life-changing for people. You know, I've had people who have decided, I had one woman, I remember I was visiting Duke University in the US, and I came across this, like I have a friend there, she invited me out to do some talks. I met a graduate student there, a PhD student, and that woman told me, she's like, I'm doing this PhD because of you and your podcast. She was working in an oyster farm. She was like just kind of like processing the oysters, and like it's really hard to process oysters. They're not, the shell is really rough. She was cutting, like it always had cuts on her hands and stuff, and she was in the rain all the time. She goes, when I got into a dark spot doing that job, because it's the only job I could find, I would put your podcast on and I would listen to it, and I would just kind of get through it, and then realize like I was inspired to go back and do my PhD. And she did. She went back and did a PhD, and who knows where her career is now. That made me feel good to be like, I put somebody out who's have like a dead end, potential job, miserable at that job, and then was able to find something better. And who knows what she'll be able to contribute in the future, in conservation. And then another person in Australia who was like, I think he was like an electrician or a plumber. He listened to the podcast, quit the podcast job after I talked about plastic pollution, and started a beach cleanup nonprofit organization around like Southern Australia. Like, these are the things that I've been able to do. And so I realized I'm like, I can actually have an impact. Whereas if I'm a GIS analyst for the federal government in a lab where I'm just putting databases together, I'm working to support my team, but from an individual standpoint, I don't get anything out of it. You know what I mean? Like, I love to be part of a team, but I'd like to just have more to do from a legacy standpoint. I don't want to just be at the end of my career and my grandkids are asking me, like, what did you do? I'm like, oh, I just maintained a database for somebody and made some maps. It didn't do it for me. And so now I'm finding that I'm at a point where I'm like, I'm changing. I have the ability to change people's lives and have the evidence to show. And that makes me feel good. And I feel like, so if I'm recommending it to somebody, I'm like, you really have to love it, but you have to understand that it's not well paying, depending on what you go into. And marine biology is not just going out and tagging sharks. Marine biology is going into policy, working for a nonprofit organization as an executive, maybe, to run the organization that will actually do great things. Marine being going into marine conservation and helping protect the ocean may not be as a researcher, as somebody in the field that most people think about when they think about marine conservation. It could be starting that business that has a circular economy, that has a circular product where your product that you make can come back and be recycled into another product. That's where marine conservation has to go. Marine conservation is starting the next solar panel company, or being a solar panel installer, or, working in the renewable energy sector to make sure that stays sustainable. That's where conservation has gone. And that's where there's such a breadth of conservation. So I'm always like, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to work in the ocean. You don't have to physically be on the ocean to protect it. It's where do you want to be? Like, what do you want to do to protect the ocean? Because a lot of people are like, I just want to protect the ocean. It's like, how? Well, I want to work with sharks. What do you want to do with sharks? Oh, I don't know. I just want to be in the field. I want to tag sharks. For what purpose? Like, why are people tagging? Like, it's diving deep into it. So a lot of people, when they ask, like, oh, what would you recommend? There's such a variety of things that you can do to protect the ocean that you have to really think about it and really dive deep into it to find out what you really want to do. And somebody in elementary school and somebody in high school will just be like, I just want to be on the ocean. I'm like, that's fine. Here are the jobs that you can do that. And this is the pay and this is the lifestyle that you'll have. So consider that when you do it, because it's difficult. I know a lot of people who work for the federal government here for Environment Canada, they have a field team. And in the summers, they're always out in the field. But if you're a mom and a dad, right, how are you going to spend time with your kids in the summer when they're off? Where are you going to, there's childcare, there's all this kind of stuff. I know a lot of people who've had to switch out of that once they become parents because their lifestyle changes. So a lot of people, when you recommend being a marine biologist, I always say, take lifestyle into consideration. What kind of lifestyle do you want to lead? You may not want to have kids. You may not want to have a family, and that's perfectly fine. And so you have a little bit more flexibility in terms of the job you can do. And the job will probably take over a little bit more of your life because, you have that time and you have that ability to do that. So I know it's probably not the answer that you were expecting in terms of what would you say? I would just say what kind of lifestyle do you want, and how much do you want to do in marine biology, and what do you want to do in marine biology? And then we go down a path, and then we can kind of narrow it down. It's kind of finding your niche within sort of the marine conservation realm.
Mm-hmm. And I think, like you said as well, it's having that drive or that reason for doing it as well. So I think a lot of careers, and there's nothing wrong with this, but a lot of people are driven by, okay, how much does it pay? What's the kind of lifestyle I can achieve with that? Or it's kind of, is this job going to give me a certain qualification? Is it going to give me a certain title? And then it's almost kind of not an ego thing in a bad way, but it's okay, but I hold this title. And that's what drives people. They want to climb that corporate ladder. But I think you've also got that other pocket of people where it's their driving force is not to say, okay, I'm a marine biologist. It might be because it is a really cool title to have, but it's not quite going to be like, oh, I'm a marine biologist. It is going to be followed by, okay, this is why I do it. and you can hear
Yeah.
that passion when they're talking about it. And like when you're talking about the podcast, it's that education side. It's I want to
Hmm.
make an impact. I want to have this
Yeah.
change on the world, no matter how people might see it as small, but it's not, because you're
Yeah.
having a ripple effect. So I think that's
Exactly.
really important, because that for me is a bigger driving factor that's going to keep you motivated
Yeah.
throughout something like this. This is a long term commitment, it's a long term journey. Once you're down that road, I doubt there's much turning back. Like, yeah, you might have to deviate, but you are going to kind of, okay, I've decided on this, and then you've got to commit. So you need a reason behind it that's more than,
Yeah.
okay, at the end of it, I'm going to earn X, Y, Z, or yeah, it's great. You might have the title of, okay, now I'm a marine technician, something
Yeah.
like that. But it
Yeah.
is that is a lifelong commitment, I think, or very, very big commitment. And you need that kind of, okay, I'm going to do this because it matters to me. And you need that passion. And
Hmm.
that's what comes across. But it is amazing what you do with your podcast as well.
Thanks.
I have taken a listen, so like I think it's time to talk about that, because I was listening to one
Absolutely.
last night and it was so good. It was amazing. I found it so interesting because I listened to the Spreading the Message Ocean
Hmm.
Conservation in 2024 one.
Yeah.
That's one that I had to listen to. Um, so yeah, I'm kind of interested as well about like with the podcast then. Um, so you said that that's more of a side hustle. Would you ever do that full time? Like if you were able to, would you like take that up in a heartbeat if you could kind of do it a bit more sustainably?
100%. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I would do it in a second, if I could do this full time. In fact, I've had the past 2.5 weeks off, or I've 2.5 weeks off over the holidays, and I've been doing it almost every day. And like, when I'm able to sit down at night and just kind of just relax, I'm like, oh, this is kind of nice to do that during the day, get a lot done, a lot more done than I can in 4 or 5 hours, um, and not feel guilty that I'm not spending time with the family, and or just spending time with my dogs, or just enjoying and relaxing. It's a nice way of doing things, and I get more done during the day than I can in the evening, as you're tired because you've worked a full day. Um, so yeah, I would definitely do that, and I'm always working on that. I'm always trying to find ways to monetize the podcast. Um, get sponsorships, provide services, or try and come up with products, and so forth. The trick is, and you'll find this as well, where when you talk about a specific niche, it all depends on what's good for that niche. So I've been able to build this size. I have over 1,500 episodes, over 2.5 million downloads. It's a wonderful thing. And I really enjoy it. Like when I first started to do podcasting, it took me a year before I started to publish, because science communication is not, you never was really done even like 10 years ago. Not a lot of scientists like talk to the public about it because they were afraid of how their message would get manipulated. I mean, if you look at the sort of the history of how climate science came out and climate communication came out, when you got like the misinformation and everything, a lot of people's careers kind of died with that, because they got their message manipulated by, you know, bad players within the climate industry, like whether it be oil and gas and things like that. So scientists were very, very wary of speaking out and just kind of talking about their research to other people, other than publishing in journals, which not a lot of the public doesn't really have access to, unless you're willing to pay $40 for one article. So when I started, I was very worried about what people would think. I still had jobs at that point. I was working for the government at that point. I was doing different kind of communications, but I was working for the government. I had an agreement with my boss that I wouldn't talk about any of my work um, without permission. And so when I started to started the podcast, and I started to do the podcast, I fell in love with it right away. I tried YouTube work at that point. My kids were toddlers at the time, so editing and stuff was a lot more work than I first anticipated. And so when I did the podcast, I could literally have a microphone just like this, sit down and just talk, because I had so much to say. And then I would have interviews, and I'd start off with interview. I start off once a week, and then I realized I'm like, I really like this. I went to 5 days a week, and then I went back to 3 days a week, and then I went to 7 days a week, and then back to 3 days a week. And I've been like that ever since. And it's just a matter of how much information can I produce, and how much time can I dedicate to put out that information. And so 3 days a week is usually good for me. But it's I'm always trying to work to do this full time, because I would be able, like, the amount of information I can get out there, and interviews that I can do, that could help people get interested into the ocean and inspired to do something about it, is amazing. And I'm just scratching the surface at this point of what I can do, in terms of working full time. But I'm always working on that. I'm always trying to find, players in the world that could, pay for this or sponsor the, episodes and stuff like that. And I'm slowly starting to look at that. But it's also, you have an audience that you've cultivated and you want to protect. So, I can't sell a lot of the typical sponsorships that you hear for podcasts, because they're not sustainable. They're not good products, for the environment. And so I don't feel comfortable, sponsoring those. And so I am very wary of what I can sponsor. I did have a sponsor this year called Ocean Soul, and they make these kind of, for the people who are watching on the YouTube, they make these kind of animals out of the flip-flops that they find along Kenyan beaches. And so this is all different colored flip-flops that they put together. And this is of a manta ray. And they gave me a bunch of them. They got like a sea turtle. I've got this like phone holder right beside me, and it's like a shark. Can you see that? It's like a shark face, and you just put your phone on it, and you just kind of hold it like this. And so these are products that I want to support. These are the companies I want to support, because not only do they pay the people, the communities, for bringing in the flip-flops, but they have artisans that actually create these and put these together and do that. And they've paid them like full-time wages, for Kenya. And so, and they promote that. So these are the companies that I look to promote. And, and they're trying to save the environment. They're trying to be good to the local people, the local villages that put in the work. Plus they're giving jobs and staying in those areas. And they're transparent. We've done during the sponsorship, we did a couple of interviews with some of the people who work for the company, some artisans, some people who do the coastal cleanups and stuff, and the marine programs. And these are the companies that I want to profile. I want to have as sponsors, because these are the companies that I'm proud of, and that do sustainable things. So that's the tough part, is trying to find, more and more companies just like Ocean Soul that I can put on and have interviews with, and have people get to know the people who work for them and the people that represent those companies.
That's really like almost ethical sponsorships, would you say? I quite like that, because
Yep.
it's like your ethics aren't just drawing a line at, okay, it's the things that you talk about, it's also everything behind the podcast, it's things to do with the sponsorships themselves. And it's good that you're still like, no, they've got to align with podcast, because that really does kind of scream, okay, this is authentic, this is who I am,
Yeah.
and these are the values I'm standing behind. And I think that's good, because I think a lot of the time with podcasting and anything like that, especially when it comes to monetization, it can get lost along the way, almost like with the messaging. So that is cool. Also, the manta ray is so cute. Like,
isn't it? It's awesome.
This video. It's adorable.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I think that is really cool. And also, with your podcast, then, is it just yourself or not? Because when I looked at your website on Speak Up for Blue, you have a few different ones. So is it more of a collective, or do you treat them as individual podcasts?
So the website is really the network of podcasts, and and I use network in a very loose kind of way. So a while ago, I started to talk about oceans because, like in 2015, when I started publishing, because there wasn't a lot on oceans at the time. And so during the time, I started to network with other, marine biologists and other wildlife biologists over that time. And we kind of discussed like them starting a podcast, and I would help some of them start a podcast. Some of them would start their own. Some of them would start a YouTube channel and start publishing on there, and I would follow them. And, we would kind of link up and exchange ideas and stuff. So I thought it would be good to have a network where we can just kind of help each other out, not necessarily like do feed swaps or, try and just get more downloads, but just to kind of help each other out on like, as podcasting is a lot of work. It's hard. It's not easy. And when you start to get into the thick of things, it can be very dark and lonely place. And so it's nice to have other people who are going through similar things and sharing sort of the successes they've had in workflows and things. And so I've always wanted to kind of keep that. and so we had this network, but I kind of failed in the network that I wanted to do, where we met like once a month and like somebody would lead the meeting, and almost like a mastermind in a way to kind of just help each other out, because we're all doing it from an environmental perspective, right? And so, you know, we have one who talks about like aqueducts, that talks about, she's a veterinary student, and she talked about she wanted to talk to different marine veterinary scientists, and so, or doctors, and so she would interview different, you know, veterinary doctors from around the world to get more information and to help other people, you know, start their process and what that would be like, which is a very unique kind of offering. And so I kind of contacted Michelle, and she was like, yeah, let's do it, you know, and other people as well, Stephanie as well, who does the wildlife one. And you know, and I started to co-host one of Beyond Jaws, which we talk about, you know, shark science careers specifically, and talk to scientists who've done careers who've been in the business for, you know, 25, 30 years, and new ones as well, and what their careers were like and what they've studied, and so forth, what advice they would give. So each and every one of them, we operate sort of independently, other than Beyond Jaws and How to Protect the Ocean, because that's the ones I do. But we kind of help each other out. So I put that network together, like that website together, just to kind of make sure that everybody can still see the different offerings. But now there are so many wildlife and marine biology and climate and seaweed and seagrass and kelp and all these different types of podcasts that are out. It's great to see sort of it blowing up and seeing so many. So having a network like that, I don't even know if it's possible. I think it's like a full-time job just to get that. And it'd be very difficult to contact each individual. What I would like to see is a little bit more of helping each other out instead of just coming up individually. Not because people aren't wanting to help each other out. I think it's just more of, we're just so disconnected, and people are from all over the world trying to do this. It would be nice to have, you know, sort of like symposiums and stuff, and maybe at conferences, to be able to all get together and say, this is what we're doing in podcasting, and this is the latest in podcasting, and we would like to, you know, kind of continue to do this. Because for me, you know, I remember I was at a conference and I was presenting on, you know, this is why people should start a marine podcast or a wildlife podcast or an environment podcast. And I remember somebody asked me at the in the question time, they're like, hey, why are you doing this? Like, why are you doing this presentation? Like, aren't you worried about competition? And I'm like, absolutely not, because there are so many people out there that need to be sort of more aware of the ocean, need to be made more aware of the ocean, that one podcast isn't going to do it, from one person. I'm a middle-aged white guy, you know, from Canada. I may appeal to certain people, and certain other people may not love me, but it's the only information they get at that time. Now there are people from all different backgrounds, all different places around the world, that are starting podcasts that are talking about marine conservation in their own light. And that's what we need. We need more people talking about the ocean. And so having more podcasts, more YouTube channels, I'm always about supporting them and helping them out wherever I can. And maybe they can help me out as they learn things, you know, over time. And I've learned from them as well, in terms of, you know, titling and getting on different apps and all this kind of stuff. And it's great to have this community of people that are talking about the ocean and putting it digitally, because we just didn't have that 10 years ago. And now we have, you know, probably about, I could probably name off 25 just off the top of my head. And then there are probably more that are around that, you know, that I may not know about. So it's great to see. I love to see it. And I still continue to love to talk about the ocean.
Mm-hmm. I can definitely tell that, and it's been amazing as well, like hearing about it, and especially with these podcasts, because they're so niche, but that's what we need. We need more things like that, where I think I love podcasts because it gets people talking, and I think they're really engaging in that. Like, I like listening to them while I'm working.
Right.
So like, if I've got any downtime at work, that's usually when I listen to a podcast, or I like to kind of do things, like two things at once, almost like if I'm watching TV, I like to do something else. So if I'm cooking, if I'm cleaning, a podcast is great because it's like, it just fills like the background noise. But I listen to the most wild podcasts, like they could be on anything. And doing this is amazing because I find out about really niche ones that could be on anything.
For
from
sure.
Like true crime, there is a lot of those, or
yes,
or like film reviews. Those are great as well. Or like managing your money, but you just learn from every single one. And I think that's why I've been talking about your podcast this week when people are asking, who
nice, thank you.
Like in my office, you'll have a lot of people from my office listening. You're like, why are people from Manchester like listening to my podcast.
I love it.
There
I
you
love
go.
it.
That'll be why. But it's things like that. It's just making sure like people are aware. Okay, this is what's out there. Like you know, you can listen to this and you can find out more. Especially like with the popularity of like David Attenborough and all those
Mm-hmm.
kind of wildlife documentaries, like on
Mm-hmm.
BBC iPlayer here in the UK, they are really popular, and you can see why because it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And even like Netflix and any documentaries that
Mm-hmm.
come out, they do release more because they are popular, and I think they're increasing popularity as
Yeah.
people care about the environment. So it is great that you're putting out that content, and you've got those contacts as well for these other podcasters, because then you can help each other out, like you said.
Yeah.
And I think that's just amazing.
Well, and I think the difference too is like when you start talking about those Netflix specials and National Geographic, who put out, you know, the phenomenal images. And I mean, there's no better voice than Sir David Attenborough. Like we all have to agree. He's probably the king of sort of the goat of doing these types of documentaries and speaking from a place of passion. I mean, when you hear passion, you hear it from Sir David Attenborough. Even when there's times where, you know, you're looking at the death of an animal on the, you hear the emotion in his voice, you know, and it tugs at your emotional strings, right? And those are great. The problem with those is they only come out every once in a while, you know, because there's such high sort of quality in terms of, you know, finding the right animals and getting the right shots and you know, the camera work and the expense that it costs. It's, you know, it comes out, you know, once a year or once every couple of years, and people get excited and they watch, but there's only so much content that they can look after, right? That they can tell. Here with podcasts, you can do it all year long, you know. And I always laugh because Oceans Day is June 8th every year, and I always say we've been doing Oceans Day every day, you know, at this podcast and other podcasts as well, because that's been our passion. And so that's the beauty of being able to sort of push the narrative of we need to protect the ocean, and here's all the information that you need, or some of the information that you need. And for ocean conservation, like for how to protect the ocean, I try and cover a lot of different bases. Other people will go more on the education. I stay more on the conservation side, but I cover a lot of different topics because I know people are interested in a lot of different topics. Some people will be more interested in coral reefs and protecting those. Some people are more interested in climate change and how it affects the ocean. Some people are just on animals and you know, and there's some fun things. I've got an interview coming up with, I'm not sure if you watched TikTok or something, but Neil the seal has really taken over TikTok in certain ways. And it's this elephant the elephant seal in I think it's in Tasmania, Australia, who has come to the shore to molt, and he's taken over the town, and he's like, he scratches himself on pylons, or sometimes you'll find himself on the doorstep of houses, and they can't leave the house because there's this massive elephant seal, and he's just a juvenile, but he's like, you know, 600-700 pounds, and he just takes over, and he's adorable and dangerous at the same time, and you're just like, this is awesome. So I have an interview with that, and you know, taking, you know, viral things like that and being like, this is a great opportunity to talk about elephant seal conservation with, you know, someone who's studying elephant seals, and, you know, taking a fun thing and being like, oh, let's take a look at this. Let's take advantage of this, all the hype around this elephant seal, and be like, where's the conservation around that? Where are they at? And give people some more information on it. So, you know, it's a lot of fun in ways, but really it's a matter of just, the goal was just to make the information as accessible as possible. And with podcasting, you can do that, because even with radio, there's only certain people who have access to it. There's only certain people who can put it out, unless you're some, you know, radio genius and like, you know, an electrician or something like that. But you're able to connect with them every day if they want, you know. And I think that's really important from a conservation standpoint, because we need it. I'm not sure if you've seen the news lately. We need it badly. You know, we needed it 30 years ago, maybe even longer, but now especially, like, we need to move a lot faster than we ever thought. And just being passive is not, we can't afford that. You know, we have to be a lot more aggressive in the way we do conservation. We have to be a lot more aggressive in the way we talk to our politicians about conservation. You know, having any party who comes in, you know, our systems, UK and Canada, very similar systems in terms of government. Any party who comes in and does not have a climate change plan is not a party that's about the future, in my opinion. from a science and conservation point of view, if we don't do something about it, if a government party or if a party that comes into government doesn't have a climate change plan, that is not the party that's in for the future. They are in for greed, and they have been bought, and that's just the end of it. Like, that's just really what it's come down to. And it's in Canada as well, and no party's perfect, but you have to have a climate change plan, because if you don't, it's, we're just going to go backwards, and we can't afford it. We just can't afford it. So, I mean, Canada, we have one of the largest boreal forests in the world, and it went on fire. The entire thing went on fire this summer. That's a dangerous thing to think about. And I was just reading an article, we're seeing, orcas that are starting to see chemicals from those fires into their systems, and they're passing it on to their calves. They can't afford that. We can't afford having them gone. So this is where we're at this point when we start talking about conservation. So this is the motivation that keeps me going for the podcast, and it keeps me going and helping people become marine biologists, or become like getting into the field of marine conservation, whether they're business people, whether they're in the fintech industry, whether, they're just, working at a local fast food place. Everybody's involved. We're all affected. Doesn't matter where you come from, or what religion you follow, or what job you work in. It's everybody is affected by this, some more than others, but we have to look out for each other.
Okay, so on that topic then, what would you say are like your top 5 tips, or even just top 3 tips that your everyday person, no matter what job they're doing, no matter who they are, what are, like, let's say 3 top tips that they can implement in their everyday life, and
Sure.
just changes that can help with marine conservation or just saving the environment?
Sure. I'll talk almost in scale. So I'll talk from the top part is get to know your government representative from all different levels, whether it's local, whether it's state or provincial, or regional or federal. Get to know your local representative and talk to them about, all the different things that are affecting you and your community and the environment. Get involved, get in front of their faces, hold meetings with them, go to their offices, go to their rallies and so forth, and talk to them, and just be like, this is what's important to me, because they are truly like, if you live in a democratic society, they are truly a representative of you. That's what they're supposed to, not represent their party, not represent the people who are supporting their campaign. They are representing you, and they should make time to have a say, whether it's an email, whether it's in person, whether you can start that relationship and start talking to them. The more people that talk to them, the more they sort of hits home, being like, okay, we're way off, or we're right on track, that kind of thing. The other thing is, look at different environmental organizations that are around you that speak to you the most, and either volunteer or see how you can help that organization or how you can contribute. Sometimes it's in the form of petitions. Sometimes it's in the form of taking an action, like sending an email that they've curated, certain talking points to your government representative. Sometimes it's, doing like a fun community thing, like a beach cleanup or some kind of cleanup, like a river or watershed cleanup. Doesn't matter whether you're living by the ocean or not. There's always somebody. It could be about climate change. It could be a protest. It could be something. Whatever speaks to you. I'm not going to say what you need to do. It's whatever speaks to you, whatever makes you happy and makes you feel like you're doing something. Being an advocate, being an activist, being like someone who's supporting a different organization, who have the ability to talk to government or have the access to talk to government to change policies, which is where we really need to focus. That is the important. So the first one is talk to your government representative. Second one is team up with an organization that will also do that and talk about policy and change policies that speak to you, to your values. And then the last one is more of an individual thing. And this is more of a thing to really get you thinking about the ocean. Now, I'm not saying if you stop using plastics right today that you are going to change the world. No, that's not going to happen. A lot of companies, the plastics companies, the oil and gas companies, make you think, oh, it's all on us individually. We have to do this. There are certain things that you can ask for. There are certain things that you can do. You can use reusable and sustainable materials. Yeti cups or Stanley cups or whatever they are. They're in fashion these days, and people have them all over the place. There are, so many different types of reusable cups. Don't take all of them. Just take 1 or 2, and you can use them as much as possible. Start buying with the ocean in mind. So look at, especially from a plastics point of view, most of those plastics are not recyclable. And, they're really damaging to the environment, whether it be in a landfill or whether it be in the ocean. So don't worry about, just avoid plastics as much as possible, especially single-use plastics. Cut like I know people are like, oh, straws, I'm so sick of hearing straws. That matters. There's a lot of straws in the ocean. There's a reason why we banning them. Plastic cutlery, if you're putting on a function for somebody, say at work, don't use plastic cutlery. You bring your own cutlery or have it at the office so that you can just wash them and reuse them. Little things like that you can do to really help. It's not going to change the world, but it'll start to make you think more of the ocean. And then so when you start to think more of the ocean, you start to act more sustainably just by thinking about it, and having that in your conscience, not as from a guilty standpoint, but just of I'm contributing, I'm helping. And if you lead by example, other people will follow. And I think that's important. Not to say, oh, I'm high and mighty that I'm doing this and you should be doing this too. Is no, I just do this. When I'm at a restaurant, I ask for seafood. But like there's seafood on the menu, I'll say, how was this caught? Where was it caught? If the waiter doesn't know, I'm like, I'm not going to order it because of that. If I don't know where it's caught and how it's caught, how can we manage fisheries properly if you don't know? And sometimes I'll ask the chef and the chef will tell you, or the manager will tell you. But if they don't know, then don't order it. Just avoid it. And that's the way to do it. It's buying power. We have buying power. It's individual, but we have buying power. So make the companies start to think twice about what they serve and how they serve it. But the big thing is the government. That's the big thing, and organizations. So I know I'm long-winded. I'm a podcaster. I can't help it, but that's what I would suggest.
Oh, no, that's okay. Yeah, that's why you're here, though, is to tell us all that information, everything that we need to know. But yeah, I think that's really good 3 tips just to have there, as in it's things that we can make changes in our everyday lives. It's 3 that should be, some of them take a bit more thought than others, but some of them buy-in reusable, here we go, my Starbucks cup.
There we go.
And you've got yours as well. Buying reusable over kind of disposable things is a small change. It does make a really big impact. And then, I think, like you said, with the others as well, anything to do with volunteering, that's great, because you'll meet amazing people there. You'll have a good time and you'll be helping save the environment. So what more could you want, really? And I do like the fact that reusable items are now, what you say, kind of trendy. They're they're popular. I think it's their time to shine, because it's they are cool and it is great, because then there'll be a big drive behind buying them, because people find it trendy. It might not be the best reasoning, but at least it's making a massive change, so everyone needs to get a reusable cup or get a Stanley cup, something like that, I think.
Exactly.
It'll be amazing. So I think it would be best if maybe we wrap up there. Is there anything else that you want to add? Anything else that you want to bring up before we wrap up?
No, I would just say if people want to listen to more of the podcast, they can go to speakupforblue.com. If you want to go specifically to how to protect the ocean, speakupforblue.com/podcast. Love to hear their thoughts on that. I really love what you're doing here in terms of talking about different ways of people starting their career. I think it's really, really helpful, especially in the times that we're in. Everybody needs somewhere to go to be able to, start their career off, whether it's marine biologist or, the next business person, going forward. So I think it's amazing what you're doing here. And I really appreciate you having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no worries. I'm really happy that you came on the podcast, because I want to make sure that I'm interviewing people from loads of different jobs and just telling people okay, getting the word out there. Yeah, you can start your own business and there's interviews on how to do that now, but it is also, okay, I want to focus on careers and say, well, this is someone who's done something, and it might be really niche, or it might be something specific as marine biology, but that is important too, because I feel if you look at it on Google, it's going to be so different. It's not going to tell you the everyday, day to day. So I really appreciate you coming on and you sharing your journey with us today.
You bet. Well, one more thing. Sorry, just before we go, I forgot to mention. So I have a group on Facebook and on LinkedIn. So on LinkedIn, it's Marine Biology Jobs. If you look up that group, I can send you the link too if you'd like, so that people can get access to if they're interested. And then there's on Facebook, it's Marine Science and Conservation Jobs. And I post the different types of jobs that I find that are available that people are hiring for. So you really get to see the different ways you can contribute to the ocean from a science point of view to a conservation to a policy to everything, and it kind of gives you an idea, especially if people who are looking, if they're in university or before university, what they want to do, even afterwards, what they really want to do. They can kind of see what's available to them and where. I try and do all over the world, like positions all over the world. So that I'll send the links to you, and maybe you can post it for people to find out.
Oh yeah, definitely. What I'll do is any links and stuff I'll definitely post down below. So yeah,
Perfect.
thank you, Andrew, for your time today. And
You
as
bet.
always, if you've enjoyed listening or watching, depending which platform you're on, please like, follow, comment, subscribe. We want to hear from you. I'm sure Andrew will be happy if you've got any questions to reach out to him. If you've got any
Absolutely.
questions for me or any other future episodes you want to see, anyone you want me to interview, then please let me know.